The Zoning Hearing Board is now in session. Good evening, everyone. This hearing is a continuation of the hearing that last convened on May 14th, 2019. And as I usually explain at the beginning of each hearing, the Zoning Hearing Board is a quasi-judicial body, and our decisions are appealable to the Common Pleas Court. We take evidence and hear sworn testimony, and we also will have time at the end for public comment and for any members of the public to become parties to this matter if they so wish. If you would like to speak, please fill out one of the cards that we had outside on the podium and hand it to the stenographer or to one of us. Having said that, we are ready to begin. Mr. Sir, will you continue with your case for the City of Harrisburg in chief?
Again, good evening. Charlie Sir from law firm of Stevens & Lee here on behalf of the city. Where we left it last time was to have the testimony of our expert engineer, Robert Hasmeyer. Robert has been qualified as an expert engineer at the prior hearing, so we're just going to continue straight on with his testimony going forward. We will be going through a couple of the exhibits again in the packet. Hopefully we all have exhibits for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to share this.
Excuse me, before you continue, at our last meeting, or previous meetings, there are members of the audience who obviously don't have the maps and that we have. Are you going to have a variety of them? Will you refer to the overhead? Last time you only had two that were on overhead. Do you have more this time?
I don't have more for overhead. I don't know what else is on. Yeah, we have these two up here, which will probably, that'll go for a lot of it. We can go use those. I don't have all my exhibits though, but we do have two.
Well, I think that thing has a pointer on it, so when you're speaking about specific areas, maybe you could use that red.
Sure.
So that the audience can understand what you're speaking about.
I think I have just one.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get this here. Okay, Robert, again, if you could just please state your name for the record.
It's Robert Hasmeyer. I work for Barton and LaJudas Engineers.
And just to confirm, you were sworn in at the last hearing and then qualified as an expert engineer, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So I'd like to turn to what I've marked as Exhibit 10 in the exhibit packet, which is actually what is, I believe, what is shown on the wall. Is that correct?
It's very similar.
Okay. Was this document either prepared by you or prepared under your direction?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And just in general, can you describe what this is showing?
Well, there's a variety of information on this particular drawing, but really what it does is to show not only the proposed Harrisburg composting area, but all the other features surrounding the particular location. There's
So why don't we do is we'll use this pointer here. Which one's the middle? The big button in the middle. Okay, so if you push the big button in the middle, you're ready.
okay.
All right. So let's start out by, on the exhibit, just primarily for the audience can see, if you could just do an outline of the school district property.
The school district property follows Stanley Drive on the south side and then comes up along the Water Authority property, which Capital Region, on the western boundary. On the northern side, there's Wayne Avenue and the extension of Wayne Avenue that forms the northern boundary And then along the eastern side, it's contiguous with the East Harrisburg Cemetery. And then it comes back to Stanley Drive, which is also the Greenbelt pathway.
And the option property that is subject to the application, which is about 13 acres, correct?
That is correct.
And could you just outline what that is on here?
In the bottom central portion, there's a delineated area of 13 acres within the 42-acre parcel owned by the Harrisburg School District.
And then I see also there's a variety of little white boxes on there. Part of it marked the option property. And you've also identified some other features in there. So let's start down in the bottom bottom left-hand side. Yeah, my left. And if you could identify what's going on down there.
All right, on the bottom left, so southwest of the proposed compost site and just south of Stanley Drive is the DGS composting facility. Immediately north of that is the salt storage area and bus parking for the Harrisburg School District, the salt storage for the city of Harrisburg. Immediately west of the site is the Capital Region Water Authority drinking water process plant. And then to the east of the property, to the right, is a Harrisburg Cemetery, Harrisburg East, and on the southern portion is a compost facility that they operate. On previous testimony, there is I can't see it very well, but immediately to the east of the parcel is a former farm residence, and just north of that is the Harrisburg School District composting area.
And that's what was testified by the previous witness.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what's on the upper right-hand corner?
So immediately north of these homes is the Edgemont Park, and the Susquehanna Township has a permitted facility for composting located just north of a ball diamond, immediately south of a row of residences on the uppermost portion of this particular exhibit.
Do you know what's being composted there?
I do not, but there are some piles there
Okay.
currently.
And you said it was permitted. Permitted by whom?
It's permitted by DEP in the name of Susquehanna Township.
Okay, so let's go to the next exhibit, which is exhibit number 11. And I think if we advance, very good. This is this is slightly different way, but this is very close to what's been marked as exhibit number 11. Okay, could you just, well, first of all, was this exhibit either prepared by you or underneath your direction and control?
Under my direction and control, there were a number of specific portions of this that were done by myself, but the drafting and some of the other engineering was by others.
And in general, what is this exhibit showing?
This exhibit provides some of the summary layout of what's going to be included in the permit application to DEP for a composting facility for yard waste and brush from the city of Harrisburg.
Okay, so let's just orient everybody. Again, can you identify on here, this appears to be, first of all, focusing in a little bit than the last exhibit, correct?
Yes, the scale is such so that it's pretty much concentrated or just shows the compost facility and the immediate contiguous activities.
And could you outline where the option area is?
So the southern portion of it, the bottom, is contiguous with Stanley Drive. Following up on the eastern side, it's just cross country, The same way with the northern boundary. The western side is contiguous to some intermittent fencing and adjoins or abuts the composting area of the Harrisburg School District. And the farmhouse, it has been referred or at least identified as immediately to the west and partially contiguous with the salt storage area and bus parking.
Let's talk a little bit about the, when we get into the site, where is the entrance?
There's an just left of center on the bottom, off from Stanley Drive, is an existing access road that has an access gate. We're proposing to redevelop the access gate and then come into a roadway that loops around on the western side of the option property.
And I see there, you have any stormwater facilities?
Yes, there are actually two facilities. There's a bioretention basin, which is on the inside of this driveway loop. And then on the southwest corner is another bioretention facility.
And have these stormwater facilities been finally designed?
They are designed, they are waiting final review pending this application for the zoning.
Do you anticipate when we go through the land development process that there will be adequate stormwater facilities on the site to accommodate the features being constructed?
Yes, we've already been able to demonstrate that with the engineered facilities, the stormwater management.
Now, you identified with the current school district composting areas. Can you just highlight that again?
Yes, there's an area just contiguous to the option property, which forms the Harrisburg composting area, the school district composting area, which is set aside here and it's not part of the option property.
Now, let's go through some of the features that are shown in here. I see something marked as a curling pile. Can you identify what that is? I think it's at the bottom of the circles.
Yes, so we really should start at the top, if I may.
Sure, start at the
So,
top.
so the waste will come in through the site is proposed to be totally fenced. There is a gate to control access. Once the Harrisburg trucks enter, there's two options. At the northern part of the site, there's 3 piles to accommodate brush and woody debris. The rectangular area is set aside for some kind of grinding if it occurs on site. And then there's a series of windrows through the middle portion of the option property, and this is to accommodate the leaves that are collected in the fall. Once the leaves decompose, then there is a curing piles, which are the 4 circles at the bottom of the site, the southern portion adjacent to the fence and then Stanley Drive. And then as the material is utilized, there's a rectangular area that is reserved for screening if the quality of the compost is such so that we want a really high end product.
Okay.
The material that comes off from the leaves can probably be used for most of the uses that the city has.
Now, then you said access is only off of Stanley Avenue, is that correct?
That is correct.
Is there any access to Wayne Avenue?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to now what I've marked as exhibit number 12, and then you can keep this, the prior exhibit still on here, but we're going to turn to exhibit 12, which is not on there. And can you identify, in general, what this is?
Yes, so there are two structures that are proposed for the site, and Exhibit 12 is a conceptual public education pavilion, and it is proposed to be located in the southwest corner of the site, and it provides an opportunity to at least bring students in and to have other educational demonstration materials as physically connected to the Greenway, the Greenbelt Parkway, which travels the same pathway as Stanley Road.
All right, so if we look down on exhibit number 12, it appears to be more or less like a pavilion, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And it does have a roof.
It has a roof and columns, some kind of a substantial floor.
And would you expect there to be any other feature like picnic benches or other benches involved inside there?
There definitely will be benches, probably a table, and we're still working out details for some kind of a poster or a board or some kind of a demonstration wall.
All right. Just wait. Let's go back to exhibit number 11, which is on the screen here. And again, this appears to be slightly different than what's on the screen, but we're going to go off of the exhibit packet here. The building you just talked about here is identified. Could you read what this is labeled?
Yes, the label on Exhibit 11 identifies that pavilion as non-residential building, education pavilion, public park, passive recreation.
And where did that last phrase, public park, passive recreation, come from?
It is part of the current zoning for this particular site.
So is it one of the permitted uses that are listed in there?
Yes, it is,
All right. In your opinion,
in my opinion.
is that what it would qualify as?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go down to the second the building, and let's go to what's been marked as exhibit number 13. Again, was this either prepared by you or under your direction?
Yes, it is.
Describe it, Joe, what's going on here.
It is a conceptual equipment storage building, and it is proposed to be located on the eastern portion of the option property as that a little bump out area. And I forget what the physical size of the bump out area is, but the proposed building is 36 by 48 feet. Thank you.
So exhibit 12, these are showing sort of building details of what it would look like.
Yes, this is a traditional pole barn structure with two roll-up entry doors. It is to provide sheltered storage for the equipment that will periodically be stored on site, particularly during the active leaf season.
And who will access that building?
Just the city of Harrisburg
So
staff.
It will not be open to the general public at all?
No.
Let's talk a little bit about the permitting that may be required for the site, particularly from the state. Are you familiar with the permitting process for a composting facility with the state?
Yes.
And could we describe typically when would you do the permitting process?
Well, the way the DEP process is set up is that we're required to demonstrate that we have land approvals. So we need to go through this zoning hearing first, and the draft permit has already been developed. It was shared with the public on the city's website, and there have been a few modifications as identified by previously at the last meeting by Attorney Neil Grover, but otherwise it is pretty much ready to go as soon as we get through this zoning approval.
So is there currently a filed permit application for this site?
No, there is not. The previous, there was a permit application, but it was withdrawn. And modified.
And once it's filed, approximately how long does it take what's the normal time period to get that permit approved?
In my opinion, probably 4 to 6 months for a site like this.
And again, your anticipation that would then be filed after and if zoning approval is received.
Correct. It'll just be held by the department pending any outcome of this zoning hearing.
So based upon that permit that go through here, are there DEP regulations which would regulate the scope and the operations of the facility?
Yes, 25 PA Code, Section 281, regulates composting facilities.
And within those compost facilities, are there sort of reporting requirements to DEP about the operations of the facility?
Depending upon the size of the facility and what permit that one applies under, the city in its application will be required to submit an annual report.
And that'll then be obviously reviewed by DEP and looked at under their normal processes, correct?
I can only assume that.
Okay. It's at least submitted to DEP.
That's correct.
Okay.
There is a burden of proof upon the city to submit this report.
Okay.
What the department does with it is
What the department does with it.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to other permitting, we had mentioned land development plans. Is your opinion that a land development plan will be submitted to Susquehanna Township for this?
Yes.
And basically, what will that involve?
It'll involve the 2 proposed structures and the stormwater control activities.
And again, the normal process, go through here, could take a couple of months to go through that, depending on the nature of the comments in the review and how good your plans are.
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other permits involved, such as an NPDES permit?
Yes, there is an NPDS permit application, and that work has already been accomplished. There may be some...
Pardon me, what does that an acronym stand for?
Yeah, could you state what that means?
NPDES is the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. There's permits for that, and industrial facilities are required to have one of those permits for any kind of point source discharge. Under the DEP rules, this is considered an industrial facility and requires an NPDES permit.
And does that also involve because of the area of disturbance?
There's 2 parts. There's a construction permit, and because it involves more than 1 acre, there's an NPDES construction permit, and then there'll also be an NPDES, a general permit for a regulated outfall. And I do not have, because we have not made the permit application yet, I don't know what the department will require us to monitor.
So those permits would then be applied in the normal course of the approval process.
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the operation, sort of in a general sense here. Is your understanding is when will the facility really be operating?
My estimate is that it'll take approximately a year to construct, 1 construction season, depending upon the bidding requirements at the city, because the value is, the value of the fence and some of the other features are over $25,000, so there will be some bidding. My understanding is that Public Works will do some of the grading work with in-house forces. We also have a mechanized gate for access control. So those activities, those facilities will have to be bid out. And then we have the 2 structures, the pavilion as well as the equipment storage unit.
Then once we get it constructed, and we're talking about the operations, we are primarily interested in the organics coming in. When would you anticipate the peak time for that?
The peak time is always during the fall, whenever leaf season is. So say late September to beginning of the first week of December, depending upon weather and precipitation.
And there could be other usage. I think there was testimony for maybe branches coming down or that type of stuff.
Yes, during the summer months when there's tree trimming, there'll be brush brought in and deposited in this area.
And who will be accessing the site? Is it accessible, when I say the site, within the fence? So I'm not talking about the pavilion area. So other than that, who will be accessing the site?
Within the fenced area, it's all controlled access and it's only Harrisburg DPW employees.
And the public, again, would only have access to the pavilion, which marked as the park area, correct?
Yes, on the southwest corner, this particular exhibit that's on the wall shows that pavilion within the fenced area. It has subsequently been revised so that the fence surrounds that particular pavilion to allow normal day-to-day access to that pavilion
All right, so
to the public.
yeah, the exhibit within the packet has the fencing, has a pavilion outside the fencing.
Correct.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about traffic. Did you have any chance to look at what the traffic volume would be coming to the site during their peak usage?
Based on information that we've been able to develop with Harrisburg Public Works, we've translated that into approximately 10 to 25 vehicle loads per day during the height of leaf season. And the variability of that number depends on the intensity of leaf cleanup as well as weather conditions.
And do you know what the normal hours of operation would be?
The public works staff normally operates from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., which is the times that we envision any access by the city, with the exception of any kind of emergency access due to a storm event.
And they would have to put some, like a tree fell down or something, that's what you're talking about.
That's
to get rid of
correct.
it, it could go into there at that time.
That's correct.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about, a little bit background about the composting site. And about how long have you been working with the city on a proposed compost site?
Since around 2014.
Okay. And are you aware what the city does now for composting leaves and their brush?
Currently, the leaves are taken to Swatara Township, and to the extent that Swatara Township can assimilate those leaves, the Swatara does accommodate the city. There is no physical room, though, for wood waste, and the city chips that and otherwise finds other locations that are currently available, permitted sites.
And were you involved in site selection for the city's proposed compost facility?
Yes, I was.
And did you look for sites within the city of Harrisburg?
I certainly did.
And what was the result of your efforts?
The largest site that I was able to find is about 3.5 acres. This is a 5-acre site and is barely large enough to accommodate the city's activities. And the other primary difficulty in trying to find a site within the city is that all but about 2 of the sites were within the 100-year floodplain, which is an automatic exclusion under the DEP regulations.
Now let's talk a little bit about the amount of materials being composted in the city. Were you given any numbers to talk about what sort of like the maximum load might be during any course?
I asked the city to weigh the leaf collection one year. So in 2016, they weighed all the leaves that they collected and amounted to almost 550 tons. We converted that to approximately 5,000 cubic yards for that particular year.
And was that design number then used, is that number then used in your design for this facility?
Yes, we added a 10% number plus accommodating some wood chips that might also be included in the windrows to come up with a design number that we're justifying to DEP.
And these numbers, they're, with the leaves, they're coming from what? From the residential area or from where?
Mostly residential, but there's also parks and any other location that has leaf material within the city. The only exception is that there has been a policy decision made by the city that this site is not available to contract operators, that is landscaping services.
So that would be, other members of the general public, including them, they can't dump their stuff or access it.
That's correct. It's only city employees who collect material within the city.
So what I'd like to now do is I'd like you to describe the composting process as it occurs, starting off with the delivery of the materials. Well, let me first ask you this. Are you familiar with the overall composting process that will occur here?
Yes.
Okay. And how might that be? Have you worked with this before? Have you studied it?
Well, let's go back.
Okay.
Let's follow your original question. And
I'll
just-
follow your question. You can answer it. All right,
Okay,
so
so-
start with the delivery of the materials.
So the delivery of the material comes up off from her street to Stanley Road. It'll come through the locked gate, and the city. It's envisioned that this. It's envisioned that this is a key card gate, which means that there's only a limited number of electronic keys available. The city has also discussed actually stationing an individual at that location during the days where there's heavy truck traffic. So I've already indicated 10 to 25 truckloads per day, and there is some convenience in leaving the gate open. The city, in the permit application to the department, all I have to demonstrate is some kind of controlled access to the site. So those are the two methods of access control. The city will bring the leaves into the site. There are some rectangular lines on this particular exhibit. What is our exhibit?
That would be exhibit number 11.
Exhibit number 11. And these are designed as windrow piles. The city will most likely, as these sites are typically operated, are end dumped. That is, the vehicle that brings the leaves dumps right off from the truck and making a long linear pile. As the leaf season continues, there are 8 windrows that are illustrated on this particular exhibit. That is 1 year's supply of leaves with that 10% contingency factor, as I had mentioned in just earlier in my testimony. Question at this point?
Okay.
Can I
Yeah,
continue?
you can. So the leaves are then dumped. What then happens next?
So that's a very concentrated work environment for the city. So after the leaves are collected, then there's moisture that's added, and using a front-end rubber-tired wheel loader, then these windrows will be developed in a more organized fashion.
Now you say moisture. What's added? Water?
Water.
Okay.
We want to bring the moisture content up to approximately 60%. The dry leaves will have a moisture content of somewhere from 25 to 40%. 60%, if you take a handful of the leaves and squeeze it within the palm of your hand, will just begin to release a little bit of moisture. If you get more droplets out of your hand, you're probably exceeding 60%. So that's the easy way to tell a 60% moisture content. The piles are trapezoidal in nature, so the bottom of this is probably 16 feet, maybe maybe a little bit wider. I think this is illustrated at 20 feet wide. The top of the pile is somewhere around 8 to 10 feet, and its height as in the permit application to DEP, and it's a long continuous pile of leaves.
So what happens after the moisture is added? Is there any, what happens next in the process?
So whoever is identified from the city as being the official operator, the site is large enough so that the operator from the city will have to have some compost training and make that demonstration to the state, and they'll bring a long thermometer. It typically has a 3-foot long probe on it, and that's inserted into the piles. And you're looking for a temperature somewhere from 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit to optimize decomposition rates.
What happens then? Is there any turning or movement of these piles?
Yes, so monitoring these piles generates some data, and periodically, anywhere from weekly in the initial stages to slowing down to biweekly and then monthly over the course of 6 months. These piles will be rotated. That is, the material from the bottom of the pile mixed in and turned over, get more oxygen into the pile, and they'll be reconsolidated, because the chemistry works out so that approximately at least a third, and by some research up to 50% of the pile is volatilized and introduced into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide and moisture.
So then the pile gets smaller.
Yes, it does. So
And-
what's shown is 8 piles when it's all done gets reduced to these 3 or these 4 curing piles at the lower end, and graphically there's an illustration along Stanley Drive here that those are much smaller than the windrows.
And does the operator or the people working underneath them then move the material from the windrows to the curing pile?
After approximately 6 months, it'll go into curing.
And then what happens in the curing pile?
It's allowed to stabilize, and there's a continual drying, because the usability of the material, you're looking for around 20 to 25% moisture, and it looks and feels a lot like peat moss.
And typically, how long will the material be in the curing pile?
The experts who put out these management activities expect at least a month. In actual practice, it may be 6 to 8 weeks. There are ways. There's some monitoring requirements just to indicate stability, and one of the biggest one is that there's no more heat being generated.
So will then, in the curing pile, will it also be monitored for temperature and stability, as you said?
Yes.
And then, once it's cured, what happens to the mulch?
The mulch is intended to be utilized by the city of Harrisburg with some of their parks activities, as well as the greenhouse, which is currently in some kind of program to be rehabilitated.
So, will that be city trucks picking up, or will the public be allowed to go on there to pick up mulch?
No, this is totally accessed by the city staff and vehicles. Now, the city has offered some public utilization of the generated compost, but they're going to relocate that cured compost to certain distribution sites on city property within at the convenience of citizens. And those will be very small piles or containers.
So no public will be going on there either dropping off leaves to begin with, or organics, or picking up the cured mulch in the end.
That's correct. One of the permit conditions requires a totally controlled site, so it is fenced and otherwise has some kind of a recordable access.
And typically, what's the timeline from a leaf arriving and then that decomposed leaf in the form of mulch leaving?
A typical, and I say this very much as typical, is around 8 months, because you want to be able to send this material out again in the springtime, early summer, because that's when most of the uses for the cured compost are. People are preparing their garden beds, using it as dressing around trees, those kinds of gardening activities. And I say typically because if this Harrisburg composting is operated, typically that's what you're going to get. Now, this is a managed facility, and depending upon how intensively it's managed, it could leave the site in maybe 5 to 6 months. And part of that is composting is nothing more than a word that describes an engineered process to speed up a natural occurring phenomena. And you're taking a carbohydrate and transforming that into water vapor and carbon dioxide. The actual formula for simple carbohydrate is 1 mole of a carbohydrate being 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygen atoms. And that is a very simple carbohydrate. Leaves are more complex, but you'll get an idea with the rest of the formula. You add 6 moles of oxygen, and then you generate 6 moles of carbon dioxide, 6 moles of water, and 577 kilocalories of thermal energy. And
So that's besides losing me in the chemistry, which is fun. That's then the normal process for what we're talking in the composting or the natural decay, if in that.
yes, whether the leaves are on the forest floor or at the city or the Harrisburg School District site, or a more intensive operation called in-vessel composting, it's always the same formula. And it's just a question of how fast do you manage that. And in the large books that you take your pick, either Mr. Epstein or Haug, H-A-U-G, have written extensively and have published books on the composting process, is that you're managing essentially the water removal, the drying of the finished product, as well as the release of thermal energy. This is an exothermic reaction caused by biologic activity as compared to either a chemical oxidation or a thermal oxidation.
So there are no additional chemicals being added other
No.
than the water in the beginning.
Just the water to optimize the microbial activity.
What about odors coming off of this? Are there any smells that you would see, or that you would be able to sense?
Leaves are pretty much a complex carbohydrate, and as I indicated in the chemistry formula, all you're getting is carbon dioxide and moisture, water vapor.
So you wouldn't anticipate there be any adverse smells coming out of this?
No, there is a slight musty odor, like if you took a shovel full of ground, but that's only if you expose the pile.
Now, you described the complex process here. How does this compare to what Jose testified of what the school district is doing on their property?
The school district has a more simplified process. It's, it's like a farm deposit where it's less managed. It's certainly not being turned, but it's still the same decay process as what takes place either on a forested floor, vacant lot, any place where there's leaves being deposited. There's just a few more leaves, but it's the same chemical process.
And so you have the same starting thing in Harrisburg and here, the leaf, and the ending would be
Right.
the decayed leaf.
Right, and it may take 2 to 5 years for that decay to actually be accomplished.
But the process that's happening here, chemically, what's happening with decomposition is really the same.
Correct.
All right, let's now go to some of the ordinances. Let's go to what I've marked as exhibit
Mr. Sir, I want to offer to you and to Mr. Hasselmeyer, would it be more comfortable for you to have a seat? This is a long time for you to stand there testifying, but I'll leave that up to you. If you'd prefer to have a seat at the end, you may.
I'm comfortable. What? Yeah, well, we're fine here.
Okay, good.
For right now.
Yes. Okay, let's turn to what I've marked as exhibit number 14. And could you identify what this is?
This is the Susquehanna Township zoning ordinance as amended through 1993.
All right, and I will say this is portions of the ordinance, correct?
Yes, it is portions of the ordinance.
And if we turn off,
And it is ordinance number 86-12 and 93-14.
and if I kind of turn on the pages here, we appear to have, we have an introductory, table of contents, is that correct? Yes.
Yes,
And then we have part 1, and I go through part 4. So we have the initial parts of the ordinance, is that correct?
yes.
Okay, so let's turn to what's at the very bottom is at page 449, which is part 4 Conservation District. And you could just identify what this is providing.
This is the Part 4 Conservation District, also for mapping purposes, C.
And it's just the zoning district, understanding the timing, but the district which would cover the option property.
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like you to note at section 402-7, and could you read what that says?
Okay, section 402 are permitted uses, and item number 7 under the permitted uses are municipal buildings and facilities, including water pumping stations, reservoirs, and similar structures.
All right, so let's go to the beginning of the ordinance where we have definitions, and that would be section 204. And is there a definition for municipal buildings and facilities contained within there? I'll let you, it's all alphabetical. Is that defined in this ordinance?
No, it is not.
Okay. So let's go to the next exhibit, which is exhibit number 15. And can you identify what this is?
This is a zoning ordinance 03-12, passed on or dated September 24th, 2003. This is exhibit 15.
And as you flip through it again, similarly, we have a table of contents, and we have selected portions through part 4, correct?
Yes, they appear to be the same selected portions as the previous exhibit. And C, Conservation District has some permitted uses also.
Again, this is the same conservation district which would cover the option property.
Yes, this is the label for the option property.
And if you go down to section 402.5, what do you see?
Municipal counties, as for permitted uses, Element 5 under that, municipal, county, state, and federal buildings and facilities in accordance with section 2038.
And that's would that be a permitted use within the C district?
Correct.
Now, are you, in this ordinance, is there a definition put in for municipal facility or something similar to that? Let's say, is there a definition, yes or no?
Yes, there is.
And what page are you on?
I'm on page 2-19.
And could you read the definition, please?
The definition of municipal, county, state, federal buildings and facilities is a building or facility owned and or operated by Susquehanna Township, Dauphin County, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or the United States government for the purpose of governmental business or services.
So that appears to be a change between the two ordinances, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you reviewed this ordinance, would the city of Harrisburg fall within that definition?
No.
So let's go to the current ordinance that I have right here, which is not an exhibit, but we're just going to look at section. All right, it's falling apart. We're going to look at section 27, 27-402. Are you familiar with this?
Yes, this is the same C conservation district as well as a listing of the permitted uses.
And if we go to number 5, we have, is that the same use that you just testified in the prior ordinance
Yes, it appears to be the same
for the municipal facility?
for municipal, county, state, and federal buildings and facilities in accordance with section 27-2038.
Again, that would be a permitted use within this district, correct?
Yes.
So we look to the definitions, and I'm within section 27-204 on page, 27-31 in my copy here. Is there a definition of municipal, county, state, federal buildings, facilities?
Yes, there is a definition, and it reads pretty closely to the previous definition that I read out of the exhibit.
And does that definition include municipalities such as the city of Harrisburg or Lower Paxton Township?
No, it does not.
Does it include the school district of Harrisburg?
No, it does not.
Now, we're going to stay within the current zoning ordinance. Are you familiar with the provisions within section 27-2204 sub 2 dealing with non-conforming uses?
Yes, this is a section relative to non-conforming uses. And item 2 under that particular section, 27-2204, is an extension. Is there a particular one?
Okay. Yeah, extension. So we're going to walk through
Okay.
these standards, and we're going to flip around to the ordinance on there. So we're going to go through here. The first one on section 2204 sub 2A essentially says that the extension must be on the same lot, occupying the use or a contiguous lot. Has that, in your opinion, been met by this application?
Yes, it definitely is, because this is all part and parcel to the 42 acres owned by the Harrisburg School District.
Okay. So we go to number B, the extension shall not replace a conforming use. Again, what's happening there right now?
There is currently some form of yard waste composting by the Harrisburg School District, and immediately adjacent is the proposed city composting activity.
And what's currently where the city's proposing? Is it just a field?
It's a field with grass.
All right, is there really any use happening on there, or is it just vacant?
It's vacant. There's, other than grass.
Right, okay. Let's go to number C, which we talk about requirements or the underlying dimensional requirements within the zoning district. And that's going to put us back to section 27-404. Which are the bulk and area regulations. And are you familiar with these regulations?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to go through this list here. We got 7 items here to go through. First one deals with residential density. There's no residential units being proposed here, right?
No, there is not.
So that really not applicable.
That's correct.
And what is the overall lot area?
Minimum lot area is 1 acre, and the city has an option on 13 acres and proposes to develop or permit 5 acres for its composting facility.
And that all exceeds 1 acre, correct?
That exceeds 1 acre.
And the minimum lot width is 100 feet. What is the existing lot width here?
In excess of 100 feet.
And if the option area was to consider a lot, is that in excess of 100 feet?
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's setbacks on here, front, side, and rear, 50, 40 feet, 50 feet. How are those, are those numbers met on this plan?
Yes, the proposed composting area does meet or exceed those requirements.
Now, there's a height regulation of a principal building of 30 feet. We're proposing 2 buildings on here. What would the proposed building height be, less than 30 feet for either building or more than 30 feet?
Neither one of them are proposed to be over 30 feet.
So that requirement will be met too?
Correct.
All right. And then the impervious lot coverage for number 5? Sorry, I missed that one, yes.
The impervious lot coverage is at or less than the 30% requirement.
Okay. And again, that would then be confirmed with the land development that's coming up.
That's correct.
Okay. So I think I'm on number 7 here, which is buffer yard for residential structure when abutting a residential use or district. Has that been met on here?
Yes, it has.
And how has that been met?
Because the 13 acres that has the option area by the city is internal to the 42 acres. So my interpretation is that the abutting lot is the balance of the 42 acres.
We've gone on to number 27, that's 405, off parking requirements here. Have you looked at that for any parking needs for this?
The only parking that we really have is that for an operator during the time that they're turning the piles, and we have more than enough parking for that. Or if there is brush being chipped up, may require 2 individuals. So we have parking for probably 4 or more vehicles at a time if required.
That last section here, 27.406, is signage. We haven't shown any signs at this point, but if any are proposed, would they be compliant with the sign regulations?
Yes, any signs will definitely be compliant.
Do you get a sign permit or be part of the land development
Yes,
process?
correct.
Okay.
And I'm expecting some of that will show up. Usually the stop signs or our access sign will definitely be part of the land development plan.
So now let's go back to section 2204 sub 2. We did A, B, and C. So if we start now, we can finish up with C. It talks about the various dimensional requirements. In your opinion, have those requirements been met?
Yes,
So let's move to number D. And this has to do with extension of use within the structure, and it limits to 25% of the gross floor area. Is the current non-conforming use the school district doing, is that occurring within a structure?
no.
So is that provision really applicable to this?
I'm going to object to that. It's clearly applicable 0 times 1.25. That's for the board to determine. That's
Okay.
clearly a provision of the ordinance.
Fair enough. Again, you said the non-conforming use, currently, is it occurring within a structure?
It is not occurring within a structure, and my opinion is that provision is not applicable
I would
to the
object again to
city's
that.
Activity. I'll move on.
So noted.
Let's go to the general special exception standards, which are in section 27-2613. Now, are you familiar with these?
Yes.
Okay. So these are, I'd just like to go through and see if you can offer some facts that you would have to either support it, and then in your opinion, as an engineer review the ordinance, whether you believe that, we meet the standard. So the first has to do with the location of the use, being in harmony with the orderly, appropriate development of the district. And what district are we in?
We're in C, the Conservation District.
Okay. And do you believe that this use is in harmony with a conservation district?
In my professional opinion and reviewing the various information in the ordinances, yes.
Now, there's also, are there any future streets being proposed?
No.
Okay. Is the existing street network giving access to the site adequate for the proposed use?
My professional opinion, it is. I had the city engineer perform a traffic count in December of 2018, and there's approximately 9 to 11 multi-axle vehicles that utilize the street. They were presumably buses, and the city, with its composting operation, will be adding a maximum of 25. It is a private road, as indicated on the PennDOT official maps. It is not receiving liquid fuels funding.
Go to number 2 here, which talks about really the nature and intensity of the use being in harmony with the district. How do you term composting in relative to conservation?
My quick assessment and my professional opinion to that is that reading through the preamble to the conservation district is setting things up so that it's naturally occurring, it's supporting the natural wildlife parks and other things, and this definitely fits into that particular desire as stated in the preamble.
And there are, in the prior exhibits, you testified about other composting sites nearby, correct?
Yes.
All right. And we didn't talk much about the DGS site. And where's that located in reference to this?
It is immediately southwest and occurs on approximately 2 acres.
Do you know what's going on that site?
There's 2 different activities, very similar to what the city of Harrisburg is proposing. There is a leaf mulching operation, leaf composting within a fenced area, and it has signage as such to that. There is also a wood chipping operation, log reduction area that's outside of the fenced area.
And how long, are you aware of how long that's been in operation now?
I can't state for certain, but somewhere around 2000, but definitely by 2000, between 2000 and 2008, there's some form of activity based upon historical research. It seems to be well defined somewhere around 2010, having a paved surface and as well as a fenced area.
And so DGS is composting leaves there,
Yes, and they are a registered site
registered with whom?
with DEP.
So they have a permit, DEP has a permit for their site here.
Well, it's a permit by rule, and one of those things that they have to do is to register the site.
And as far as you're aware of, are there any problems with that site in relation to the neighbors or the neighborhood?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, you also mentioned the one on Edgemont. If we go back there, which was then, would you point out what that is?
What exhibit is that?
it's exhibit number 10.
So on exhibit number 10 in the west corner are some municipal facilities labeled as Edgemont Park, and on the northern boundary, abutting the houses, and I don't know what street that is, but on the northern boundary of Edgemont Park is a permitted, a registered facility for composting area on the northwest corner or northeast corner of that particular park.
And who's the permit holder for that?
The permit holder is Susquehanna Township.
And are you aware what Susquehanna Township's doing up there?
The information that I've been able to get off from the DEP website is that it's a similar activity as what City of Harrisburg is proposing, is leaves and woody waste. When I've visited the site, it appears just to be, right now, just woody waste. There's a large static pile of wood chips and another static pile of woody brush.
It appears that then it wouldn't be as, I call it mechanized as what we're proposing. Is that a fair statement?
There's no evidence of windrows that I've been able to determine either on the aerial photograph or doing a site visit.
And as far as you would be aware of, are the chemical processes that you described happening on this on the option property, would they be similar to what's happening on the Edgemont?
I'm going to object just to clarification of chemical, whether it just means natural decay, like leaf laying on the ground anywhere, or actually are chemicals involved.
All right, let's talk about the natural decay that you described. Would that be similar at the Edgemont Park to what's happening on the option property? Proposed on the option property?
Yes.
Okay. And are you aware of any complaints or issues with the township's composting area within Edgemont?
I'm going to object, there's no foundation in how you would know that.
Well, I'm asking if you answer yes or no, if he's aware.
I don't
You may
have
continue.
any information to indicate either way.
Okay. All right, so let's now go back to 27. I'm within the general special exception standards. You pretty much did number 1 and number 2 about being harmed. They seem to be overlaid. Talk about number 3 here, which talks about traffic and traffic congestion. You did testify that you looked at it. In your opinion, would there be traffic congestion on the site or on the nearby roads because of the use?
I can't envision the traffic congestion being an issue here.
Let's go to then number 4 here. Let's meet the specific requirements for the use within Part 21. And that really goes to the expansion of the non-conforming use, which we already talked about, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, are you aware of any other standards within the ordinance that you had looked at regarding this proposed use?
We did look at the requirements of the land development plan, and our review indicates that we're going to be able to meet those requirements.
Again, that's a separate process, which will happen
Yes.
afterwards. Yeah, but as to the zoning ordinance, are you aware of any other requirements?
No, none that we haven't already met.
Okay. I think that's it. Anything else? No. Okay, that's all we have for Robert, so he's here for cross-exam, and I'll just hop over here.
All right, let's proceed if we may. Are you good? Mr. Diamond, with your cross, please.
Mr. Hasmeyer, just in terms of your general involvement with this project, and you say you've been involved since 2014,
Yes,
that's V&L company you work for.
that's correct.
And so you're being paid, I assume, not merely to be an expert in this case, but you're actually doing the DEP applications, the design work. You have a stake that's bigger than simply being a paid expert in this case.
Well, I'm the design engineer to assist the city through this. There were some underlying issues with DEP that shut down what was called the log lot, as well as another issue with leaves going to the incinerator, and that removed some options for the city, and I was requested to provide some assistance to become Act 101 compliant.
Sorry, I wonder, would it be easier if you sat up there now?
Yes.
Why don't you
Can I take this
Yeah,
one?
take this and go. No, you can,
Yeah, that makes sense.
all right, you can sit there, take it from here. Please.
You can use the microphone that's at the chair, too.
Just keep the mic close to you as you talk from over there.
So how did you first become involved with looking for a site to develop a composting facility for the city? Like, who came to you, how'd that get started?
I'll describe it this way. My contract was through Novak Consulting, which was a special consultant to work with the city for the development and implementation of the Strong Plan. My role, as well as the company, the Barton and Judas role, was to work with the Department of Public Works on specific designated activities. And one of those activities, as identified by Novak, was the Act 101 non-compliance by the city.
And can you explain a little bit more about what Act 101 noncompliance really means, especially in the context of this composting waste facility?
Act 101 was passed by the state legislature in 1988, and it's generally known as the Recycling Act. It has curbside recycling mandated for communities having 5,000 persons or more. But there are also many other requirements in there, and one of those requirements is that organic materials, specifically leaves and wood waste, shall not be deposited in permitted disposal facilities, which in the terms as implemented by DEP means no landfill or waste combustion activities.
And so, when did the city first determine it had an Act 101 noncompliance issue it had to address, if you know?
I don't know how many years ago DEP had been working with the city, but it certainly came up in my discussions with working for the implementation of the Strong Plan in 2014.
What's the Strong Plan?
The Strong Plan is the fiscal recovery plan for the city of Harrisburg.
So am I correct, this facility we're talking about here is really for collection citywide? It really would be the composting facility for the city?
Yes.
So when you first got involved, your scope of work, did that include coming up with a game plan for how to dispose of this, whether it be more than one facility, finding a site, those kinds of things?
I worked with the Public Works Department to identify what the current methods of leaf and wood waste disposal were, and to look at ways to identify future methods of compliance with Act 101.
And it's that need of the city that's driving this process?
Yes, it is.
So did you look, I understand you did look at potential sites in the city,
That's correct.
and approximately how many?
I think there were 11 sites within the city, and I know there were some outside of the city.
Okay, and these sites in the city, were they owned by the city, or did you also look at potentially acquiring property?
Both.
Did you look at things like Reservoir Park?
No, I did not, because there are some regulatory criteria that I thought could not be met at Reservoir Park.
And what are they?
Right now, I don't recall.
That's not in a floodplain, right?
No, it's not.
Did you rule out any of those city potential sites because they were too close to residential property?
No.
Now, you mentioned you looked at other sites outside of the city. Did you look at any other sites in Susquehanna Township where zoning does permit waste facilities?
I can't recall where those additional sites are at the moment. I didn't not review that for tonight's testimony.
Okay. But you do recall first ruling out other sites before looking at this site?
Correct.
Have you ever been engaged by the school board, the Harrisburg School District, to develop a site?
Direct answer to your question is no. In the first permit application, it was a cooperative permit application that was also going to work, or it was a cooperative venture between the city of Harrisburg and the Harrisburg School District.
Who was paying for that?
At that time, it was the Department of Community and Economic Development as part of the Strong Plan recovery.
Is that affiliated with the city?
No,
Is it affiliated at all with the school district?
no.
Who's paying you now?
The city of Harrisburg. The funding that was available from when I was working as a subconsultant with Novak has expired, and the city has picked up the reimbursement, my fees, to continue the process that was started by Novak and the Department of Community and Economic Development.
In the combination of those so far, how much has your firm earned from this project?
Relevance to the amount of money.
Well, I think we were told when we did the voir dire for the expert that on Cross would be able to look into his stake in his personal connection. Our understanding from his earlier testimony, he's not merely a paid expert, which I understand that would be irrelevant, but he has a stake in the outcome. He's going to get paid for doing additional design work, applications to DEP, et cetera. So I think it goes to the potential bias, at least for this board or the courts thereafter to consider, but and let me say, it also may go to standing, because if you recall, at the last hearing, there were representations that there are no city funds being committed to this.
Mr. Diamond, I didn't hear the last thing you said.
What I was going to say is I think it may also be relevant to the standing issue, and, you know, to the extent it's on appeal, et cetera, because at the last hearing, there were representations and there was a document, City Exhibit Number 16, that seemed to be suggesting there were no city funds committed to this. So we think it's relevant, obviously, to standing,
No
but also
city funds
bias.
committed to what?
No city funding being committed to paying for this project.
And my objection is to the amount. He's testified he is a consultant being paid by the city of Harrisburg to do the work he's doing, as well as the future work for the land and all. That's already in there. The question here had to do with the amount. I think it's absolutely irrelevant.
I'll sustain the objection. He has testified that he is being paid, I believe.
Okay. If not the specific amount, can I ask whether it's substantial?
Same objection.
Sustained.
Thank you. As part of your work, did you meet with city council?
I have met with city council on certain other activities that involve public works. The compost project did come up in some of those meetings.
Did you meet with the Harrisburg School District's board?
Yes.
And when was that?
I don't recall the actual dates, but I do recall at least 2 meetings that I attended with the school board.
Were any of those subsequent to when you pulled the first DEP application?
No, not with my attendance. There were other city staff that attended those meetings.
Now, are you aware of, or do you have any evidence showing that the school district, not the city, had a need to expand, a natural need to expand its leaf dumping area by this magnitude?
Objection, relevance as to the school district's need. This application is not about the need of the school district, but rather the need of the actual expansion, which is clearly being undertaken by the city.
Not only is it relevant, it's a decisive factor. And as this board knows from the Harrisburg Gardens decision all the way up, and this is right on point with this, they have a burden of proving that natural expansion. And what they're actually purporting to do here is bring in a whole second use beside it, but they could never get this expansion without, and that's interpreting this very section, this very ordinance as a matter of law. It's critical that they can prove natural expansion by the use there.
The objection's overruled. You may continue.
Could you please answer that question?
Restate the question, please, or have
Could
it
you read the
read?
question back? Thank you.
Now, are you aware of, or do you have any evidence showing that the school district, not the city, had a need to expand, a natural need to expand its leaf dumping area by this magnitude?
At the 2 meetings that I attended with the school board, at least one of those meetings described the content of Act 101 of 1988, and there are provisions in there where all school districts must be a participant in the requirements identified in Act 101. Therefore,
Now, I'm asking you this magnitude. So, in fact, let me,
can I finish,
Yes, go
please?
ahead.
Okay, so Act 101 requires the school districts to have programs that do recycling and also the other mandates that are in there, and it's my opinion that that also includes composting.
okay. Now, so let's talk about their composting meeting. So they were doing something that you claimed to have been composting. We're going to get into that definition later. But whatever they were doing, did their property holdings expand by that many hundreds of percent, thousands of percent, that they would be going from this small little leaf pile that sits there forever to your 13.13 acre facility? The school district, for leaf dropping, composting, whatever you want to call it.
I don't, what's your question?
My question is, the school district's leaf needs, have they suddenly changed dramatically to the point that if the city never showed up and said, we want to do this whole second enterprise for our city, does the school district have a need to take its claimed leaf pile and now turn it into a managed, controlled 13.13 acre operating facility?
You're asking me an opinion about their actions.
Well, you were able to give opinions earlier. I'm asking you,
Yeah.
do you know any facts?
Do they generate enough material from their various school properties to require that kind of expansion? And if I go through the engineering analysis, I think some expansion is probably required, but not to the level that is what the city is proposing.
I'd like to refer you to what we had marked, actually had admitted previously as Township Exhibit Number 1, which was, and maybe you looked at it already, that was the affidavit from DEP. And if I could borrow that.
City number 16?
So you need to get that.
Oh,
Yeah. Handing you what has been previously admitted as Township Number 1, and it's an affidavit, but it looks like you already have it there.
Well, I borrowed from it.
Now, this Anthony Rathbon, you're familiar with him, are you not?
I am.
And he's the same individual you were dealing with at the first aborted attempt to take a DEP application for it, correct?
The previous permit application was withdrawn because we could not demonstrate that we had met the land development approval.
Now, is that what they meant by it was an incomplete or insufficient, whatever that phrase was in their application? You know? Did they identify insufficiencies with your application?
In paragraph 17, it indicates that the city of Harrisburg submitted a general permit application to the department for a yard waste composting facility at 1850 Stanley Road. The department sent an administrative incompleteness review letter dated May 9th, 2017, requesting more information. And I recall that that may have been the land approval. Municipal approval was probably included in that administrative letter.
Did you not know that when you filed the application? Previously tonight, you testified you don't file an application until you have the zoning in hand. Is that not true?
At the time, you can request an application at any time, but we were expecting based on meetings with certain township officials, we were expecting that approval to come forthwith, and so we submitted the application.
over at Township Exhibit number 4. Mark this Township Exhibit number 4 just for completeness. You take a look at this and tell me, is this the letter you sent to that same individual withdrawing the first permit application? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, I was authorized by the city to send a letter to DEP withdrawing the application.
And that first application, was that a very different concept than this one?
It's still a composting, but there was the inclusion of food waste from the city schools. And the general permit, which is 025, is a general permit that includes food waste.
Now this current concept, did I understand from some of the presentation last time that it's going to include grass clippings, not just leaves, and not leaves and woody substances?
The general permit 030 does allow grass clippings.
I'd move for the admission of all of our exhibits.
So admitted.
Now, do you have your, one of these application packets with the exhibits? I think this may be the one that's essentially what's on the wall, maybe with some slight differences, and that's your exhibit number 10. Just, and actually, I have this marked as Township Exhibit number 5, although it's just an isolated portion of that that I want to focus your attention on. And it's slightly enlarged. While I'm over here, I'll show you, referring to this little rectangle here that you called out as where the current leaf pile, reclaimed leaf pile is. So I'd like you to take a look at that and I want to make sure I'm understanding. This seems to say that that entire rectangle is 0.58 acres. Is that a correct interpretation of your plan?
Yes.
And then I'm looking at this, now it's enlarged here so you can see it, but there's a street, it looks like, through there. There's all kinds of trees in there. I see a lot of green grass in there. Now obviously this is two-dimensional, so there is some tan in there that I'm assuming you're claiming is the leaves, but obviously that's not even half of that 0.58 acre area, correct?
So is your question whether or not that
I'm asking
area
if
is?
it's, you're looking at the picture.
Yes,
This is your plan.
yes.
It looks like in that rectangle, which is only 0.58 acres, hardly any of it's even tan.
But you're taking a snapshot on one particular aerial photograph. We had access to multiple years of aerial photographs, and these piles move around within that rectangle.
I think the testimony of the gentleman that was here before said they just left them there forever. Do you have evidence that's contrary to what his testimony was?
If you look at the aerial photographs through time, there appears to be some windrow evidence from the aerial photographs, and
How do you
because
know- let me ask you this.
excuse me, let me finish here for a moment. I may already answer part of your question.
Okay.
So, in looking at some of those aerial photographs, there's shadow lines across it, and I'm going to say that Jose, the individual who worked for the school district, was probably
Don't tell us what he said,
no,
just tell
but
me what you personally know.
but looking at those shadow lines and knowing how these operations of composting works, that those loads were in dumped to formulate a windrow where they managed
You
beyond
weren't there
that.
at the time, were you? You
No.
didn't see it?
No,
You had no, let me ask you this, when's the first time you came to this property?
probably 2016.
So you don't have any personal knowledge of what was there prior to that time?
Personally, no, but I can interpret the evidence.
Well, I think
so-
we all can. So when we look at those pictures, they're two-dimensional, correct? We don't know what those are.
No, there's a whole field in aerial photography
Right, and we
interpretation.
can all look at those pictures. But in fact, let's talk about some of your pictures here. So, tell us, when I look at exhibit number 6, turn to that. This, I think, is what you're talking about, the shadows. We don't really know what that is. But you represent, let me ask this, did I understand correctly, this was prepared under your direction?
Yes,
By B&L?
yes,
And this purports to represent, this is what this looked like February 26, 2004, correct?
correct.
Now, doesn't this look like there's a lot of green on the trees for February?
No, it is black.
Okay.
You can make some interpretation by the grass, and for February, grass may or may not be green, but the trees definitely are black. There's no leaf canopy in that wooded area to the north and to the west.
So you are not in an airplane that day, you don't know what that looked like that day. You can't swear that's what that was on that day, correct?
No, but given some of the testimony from Jose, and then looking at the aerial
Well, I'm asking what you
photo.
know. I want to make sure I understand what you personally know. So you don't know what it looked like from the air on February 26, 2004.
No,
Okay. I think we're at exhibit 6. I'm going to show you the weather records, the official weather records, that there's 2 inches of snow on the ground on that day in that site. Now, assuming that the weather records are correct, is it possible that picture could be from February 26, 2004?
Objection, wait, just one little foundation here. We have a snapshot of a national picture of interactive snow information and something that's...
Yep, and if you page through, this is the,
Sorry, can I finish?
Go ahead.
Jim, please, slow down. There appears to be a national one, there appears to be state, and then there's some graphs under here. There's no explanation whatsoever of what these are, or who prepared them, or anything, the foundation of them. You don't even know what we're looking at.
we'll put on foundation later, but I mean, these are national, these are,
I think we need the foundation, Mr. Diamond.
Well, I mean, they're right off the internet. Those are the official weather records.
Check it. It's off the internet. it
And
doesn't
we're
count.
going to have our engineer also
Well,
verify.
then, I think the engineer needs to come through and do a foundation.
I'm just asking him if,
I'll sustain the objection for now.
all right, so let's turn to exhibit number 7. This also was prepared at your direction, correct?
Yes.
Now, you didn't prepare,
No.
but you represent this is what this looked like on April 5, 2003. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. There is information at the bottom that indicates an imagery date.
We are on 7, 8? Okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's correct.
7, okay. This is exhibit number 7. And it's your 2 exhibits we just talked about, supposedly a year apart. And you'll notice I circled some things that look fairly unique, like where every car is in the picture, the unique grass, and we're going to move some circles around them so you can compare them to your exhibit. These are supposedly a year apart. So I'd like you to look at the uppermost circle on the first page and on the second page, and you'll see a shape of what looks like a bird flying in, obviously how the grass is cut or grown or whatever there. And then you'll see a heart kind of right below that. And you'll see this is 2 years apart, or a year apart. Now, if you look at the circled parking lots, you'll notice that every car and every truck is in the exact identical location. Do you agree with me that your 2 exhibits cannot be on 2 separate dates?
I'll agree with you to the extent that the...
Yes or no question?
No. Well,
Do you think they are from 2 different dates?
as for the grassed elements, those could probably reappear. But the parking lot information seems to indicate that there is some discrepancies here that, in which these photographs may have some dating discrepancies.
I move for the admission of Exhibit 7.
Any objection?
No, no objection.
So admitted.
Now I think we're at 8. And I will say these are the Dauphin County GIS maps, base maps for 2011 and 2016. And I will say I personally downloaded these. And they are, I'd ask the board to take administrative notice of them. They're verifiable on the county's website. So I'd like you to take a look. These are I understand the area that, same area you were talking about where you thought there might be windrows. You agree with me, at least on these two occasions, there's really nothing there. Or certainly it doesn't look like windrows or anything like that.
Just put an objection and exhibit, there's no foundation of.
I think the funny thing, like I said, I asked for administrative notice if you can verify it, that it's,
Who prepared this, or, you know,
I prepared it. That's what I'm saying. I'm willing to go under oath to say that.
Hard to read the map.
Well, they have the,
My
Yeah.
question to you, Mr. Diamond, is what are the dates?
Just a moment. We will take notice of that since we can verify it.
thank you. I move for the admission of Exhibit 8. And Leader speaks for
Any
himself.
objection?
yeah, objection, yeah, commission.
Going to overrule the objection and admit Exhibit 8.
Now, on your direct, you talked about two buildings. Call them Building 1 and Building 2. So the first building,
Can we go back to these maps? This says basement.
no, I'm asking, please answer, listen to my question.
Okay.
Pay attention to what I'm asking.
Mr. Diamond, please. Courtesy, please.
So, the purpose of these two buildings, we'll start with the first one that was like a pavilion. And I think you call that a park. Let me find your label for that.
Exhibit 12?
Yeah, Exhibit 11 actually has Education Pavilion, Public Park, Passive Recreation. Have you ever been involved in any waste disposal facility, yard waste or otherwise, that had a building like that connected?
Yes.
Okay, where?
I don't remember the specific locations, but it is frequently an addition to solid waste facilities to have some kind of a public use or public structure. Right now, I am involved with a very similar activity at Lanchester Landfill in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania.
And then the second building, which was the storage building. Now, I understand that would actually be used for storing part of the equipment for the composting facility.
Yes.
Now, previously, you said that you looked at the zoning ordinance provisions, but just factually, am I correct that or at least as far as you know, the school district's leaf pile activity, whatever it was all outside? There was nothing inside the building?
Correct.
And this building is essential to your requested waste composting facility?
It is part of the evolution in the design, so that it is part and parcel to the application at this time.
So we would take that if, for some reason, that's fatal to it, that's actually a part of the application that's before this board, correct?
Correct.
Now, you had in an earlier version of this case testified that the city did not intend to construct any actual building. Has that changed from the prior case until now?
Yes, it has.
And I think you had testified in the prior case about the equipment being stored off-site at a different location, and that apparently has also changed, correct?
Yes, it has.
Right. Now, I'd like to kind of go through some of these operational things you talked about. So it was a very complex scientific controlled process you talked about that would be ongoing if this were approved, correct?
Yes.
I think we were at 9, so this would be 9 and 10. So, and you regularly deal with DEP applications and compliance and that sort of thing, correct?
I regularly deal with DEP. I don't know what you mean by the compliance portion of this.
Okay, so the Act 101 compliance project that you're talking about, that would be compliance with DEP regulations?
Well, I recommend to my clients on how to comply with the regulations or a legal position like Act 101.
I hand you, first one, asked to be marked as Township Exhibit 9, and this is on the DEP resources list online. Again, I'd ask the board to take administrative notice of it. And are you familiar, or do you look at the resources that DEP puts out, guidance on how to run waste facilities and those kinds of things?
I have seen some of their guidance materials, yes.
And I think you mentioned that early on that you had at one point, maybe this was even in the last case, part of your career you worked at Gannett Fleming.
Yes.
And I think we talked about a reference manual that's one of the DEP. In fact, I'll direct your attention to it's easy to find because it's one of the last links here. So if you go to the,
Counselor, you need the mic.
I'm sorry, if you go to the second to the last page, the top bullet where it says waste composting operator training, Cumberland County PDF. I will represent to you that this, what I'm going to have marked as exhibit number 10 is that link. Again, I'd ask the board to take administrative notice. Are you at all familiar with this handbook?
This does look familiar.
And a lot of it seems to cover some of the same ground that you talked about, maybe in a little more detail, but some of the process that you kind of walked us through that's proposed here. And I'd like to kind of draw your attention to a few and just try to make sure we're understanding what is proposed here and also to some extent what's happened in the past there. So you had testified about the need to add moisture, water.
Correct.
And how much, if you know offhand, how much water for a cubic yard would you normally have to add? A cubic yard of, let's say, leaves?
I don't have that number on the top of my head.
Okay. So, and maybe I'll draw your attention to some things in here, we'll try to. So, on page 5, there's a reference to sometimes, not always, there can be shredding of leaves in these composting facilities. Is that a thing that would happen here?
Depends on the equipment that's available. If the city just turns the leaves with a front-end tire loader, there will not be the shredding. If they get access to a leaf turner or some kind of a mechanical turning equipment, then there will be shredding.
Okay, and I think in the last case you specifically testified the city was looking, maybe this has changed, at trying to get an arrangement for the scat turners of Cumberland County. Is that no longer the plan?
That option appears not to be available at this particular time. If the city gets a permitted composting facility, we do have an open door to revisit that with the consortium.
Now, when we talk about the water, let me direct your attention to page 6, where it says, I'm going to quote, as a rule of thumb, dry leaves initially need about 20 gallons of water for every cubic yard of leaves. Does that sound accurate to you?
I read the same thing that you're reading.
And you don't disagree with that?
I have nothing to challenge it with, correct?
Okay. So there's going to be some very extensive water added here. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And to your knowledge, the school district never did anything like that?
No.
Correct? Now, you'll see on page 4 there are references to this need to regulate the ratio between carbon and nitrogen, and you kind of touched on that a little bit.
What page?
Page 4.
Okay.
So, am I understanding correctly, this has to be a fairly precisely managed process in terms of even that aspect, the carbon to nitrogen ratio, particularly if you're going to introduce grass clippings, correct?
I don't know that I agree with the word precise, but there is definitely a management aspect to this, yes.
And if that management is off, there can be odor problems, correct?
There's a variety of issues that create the odors, but the significant one is inadequate oxygen.
So that's doing the appropriate turning of the leaves, at least to aerate it.
Correct.
How important is it when you mix in grass clippings as opposed to just having leaves in terms of the potential for odor?
Can you restate the question, please?
So this facility, if I understand it correctly, proposes to actually also have the possibility of grass clippings, correct?
The city will have the grass clippings from parks mowings that where they do not leave them in place with mulching mowers. If they accumulate any kind of quantity of grass, they will bring it to this yard waste composting facility.
And then that has to be mixed at a certain ratio, correct?
It has to be mixed in with the carbonaceous material of the leaves, yes.
And that ratio actually dictates carbon, i.e. leaves, versus nitrogen, i.e. the grass clippings, correct?
Yes, but there's more than enough carbonaceous material here for the amount of grass clippings the city will have.
So to reach the timetables you were talking about, would you need to add any inoculants other than the grass? Any other accelerants, if you will, to get a better nitrogen carbon?
No,
ratio?
because the carbon will break down by itself. It doesn't need the nitrogen. If you're going to add nitrogen, you have to be cognizant that you can't add too much for the amount of carbon material.
Now, why does one add inoculants?
It's all part of the engineered system. If you're really trying to speed up the process, I can probably make a marketable compost material in as little as 4 to 6 weeks. If you are really diligent about it and you want to invest in some mechanized equipment. Composting is all about speeding up a natural process.
Let's talk about that. You had mentioned in your direct testimony a few times things to the effect of it's really the same as on a forest floor. Chemically, it breaks down.
Correct.
But am I not correct that the word composting, including for DEP very specific purposes, really does require a controlled, it doesn't simply acknowledge a leaf falls on the ground and it's going to deteriorate. It actually is, I think in your words, an engineered process, correct?
The DEP acknowledges that there are different levels of composting. They have a policy document from 1997, I believe it is, that describes some of that natural versus engineered component more specifically.
Just for reference, I'm going to add Mark's, some DEP regulations we can refer to here. You at 11 now? Have marked as Township Exhibit number 11. These are just some excerpts of some DEP regulations. I'd actually like to draw your attention specifically, if you page to the 4th page, you'll see highlighted the word composting as a definition, and this is 25 PA Code, section 271.1. It's only one section. Can you read that out loud for us?
Composting, the process by which organic solid waste is biologically decomposed under controlled anaerobic or aerobic conditions to yield a humus-like product.
Okay. So when we use the word composting or composting waste facility, it's not really the leaf that falls in the woods by itself and just rots away, correct? In this sense.
Under the DEP regulation that I just read from, they're looking for some kind of control process.
Yeah, and that's
If
sort
you
of
go
what
to a textbook, the composting will also include any kind of organic decomposition from the detritus of a forest floor.
Okay, so if we got out to there and the whole world is, almost the whole world is a composting facility, if we were that loose of definition.
Anywhere where there's deciduous trees, yes.
But for this purpose, you were talking about it's an engineered process, a very complex engineered process, you said.
We're looking to accelerate a naturally occurring process, yes. And I believe that that's what's being indicated with this DEP definition.
And that animal of a controlled process, this activity, this very scientific controlled activity, that's not something, none of the watering, the checking the temperature, all those things you talked about, that's not something the school district was doing to you or not. You don't have any evidence.
I do not have any evidence of that, correct?
And you saw the affidavit earlier from DEP indicating that the school district never had any DEP permit, including permit by rule, correct?
If they were my client, I would, there is a section in Pennsylvania Code 25 PA, or Code, well, Title 25, Section 281, which deals with composting. And they are deemed as a captive facility and not, there is language in there that they're deemed to have a permit.
Well, let's look at so you have those in front of you. Let's look at the permit by rule definition. They're there alphabetically. And then
Yes.
you'll also see there's a yard waste composting facility. And then further back, you'll see section 271.101, which lays out the permit requirements. And then 271.103, the permit by rule requirements, and what's required in order to have that. So it's not really, at least in this system, not a artificially deemed thing. There's actually a whole lot of things you have to do, correct, to have a permit by rule.
Correct.
And the school district never did any of those things or had a permit by rule to your knowledge?
No, and they never registered a site. The permit by rule, as I understand it and would recommend to my clients, would apply to either the Susquehanna Township site at Edgemont Park or the DGS site. And both of those, I believe, have permit by rules.
Let me stop you
And
a
they
second on
registered the
Susquehanna
site.
Township one, you mean the Edgemont one?
Yes,
And you testified almost like you knew something about it. Do you know what a composting pad is?
yes.
So what is a composting pad?
Well, a pad is an impervious surface by which the composting takes place on, or the management of the organic piles. And on EFACS, it lists both the Susquehanna Edgemont site as well as DGS as one of those registered sites.
So do you have any, we have someone who will testify later, but that site is only used to temporarily store things when they're dropped off until they're picked up and taken to a real process?
This is
So-
Edgemont?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
But it's listed under the DEP EFACS as being a registered composting site.
Okay. But when you say things like you don't see any problems with it, I mean, you don't have knowledge of what that site's even all about, correct?
I have not witnessed the operations there. I have inquired around to people who have seen the site.
Now, you had testified about very distinct stations, if you will, in your proposed operation, and it moved almost from, like an assembly line from one thing to the other, from delivery, to curing piles, to screening, and then distribution. The school district, to your knowledge, never had moved things from windrows to curing piles, correct?
Not to my knowledge. It appears that most of the material has been left on site.
Kind of turn back to this handbook and let's look at some of the information in there and see if you agree with it. So, let's turn to page 7. And there's a reference to decomposting waste generating heat. It's under that heading, temperature number 4. Now, this seems to indicate that the upper end of the optimum range is 140. I think in your direct testimony you were talking about temperatures up to 150. Did I understand you correctly?
I believe I did. I think I stated between 130 and 150.
Okay. And did I understand correctly, that's if there's a real a controlled facility, you actually have a probe temperature gauge where you have to go periodically checking into the windrows to see what the temperatures are at different parts of the windrows?
Yes, the general permit requirements that DEP has, of which the city is applying under one of those general permits, has a temperature management requirement.
And again, the gentleman from the school district testified they never did anything like that, right?
Correct. And if they were my client, I'd recommend that they operate the facility as a captive processing facility, which doesn't even require registration under the DP regulations.
They did.
Pardon me?
Yeah, and you have no knowledge that they did do such a...
That's correct. They
fact,
don't,
if we
they
talk
don't
about-
show up on EFACs.
Talk about the permit by rule.
Pardon me?
Permit by rule, I want to focus on that a second. You have in front of you the DEP, in Township Exhibit 11, the DEP regulations, and this is 271.103. And I'll direct you to A. These are, if I understand it correctly, what you have to do, even to have that very low-level permit by rule, in addition to registering, and I'll in a minute show you the application form. It's not just a one-sentence kind of thing, but a very long form. But am I correct that...
Which section are you
Okay,
referring to?
this is section 271.103. And I want to refer to a few things. In fact, let's talk about A3, that you have to have something called a preparedness, prevention, and contingency plan. Would you have that for this facility, for the city?
For the city? Yes.
The school district, to your knowledge, never had such an animal, correct?
No, because they don't even qualify as permit by rule.
Now, in that same page 7 under temperature. The last sentence of the first paragraph says, the compost piles may also be susceptible to spontaneous combustion at higher temperatures. Have you ever been involved in a project that had fire?
Personally, no.
Are you
The-
aware of it?
I am aware of some, and they're all highly mechanized equipment. 2 fires that I can recall were at Schenectady, New York, and involved in-vessel composting. They were trying to produce a compostable product in a matter of days. And it's all about heat management when you get into very compressed time periods.
Now, in the last round of the last case, I don't know what's changed between then, so I want to try to understand this, but in terms of the mechanized equipment that would be out there, before you had talked about grinding wood potentially. Is that still something that's part of the request?
The permit application to DEP has an official designation for on-site grinding. The city has moved to purchase some larger wood chippers. I believe that there is one currently on order for a 15-inch diameter wood piece, and it is operationally, most of the chipping will take place at the curbside or in the park and then delivered chipped. But there will still be those larger pieces of wood that are delivered to the proposed compost site.
Okay, so the larger pieces of wood, what happens to those?
They either, on an annual basis, are either transported to some location that will grind them, or the city will contract, depending on the quantity, the city will contract for a service to come in and grind the oversized logs.
And that would happen at the subject property?
Correct.
The same document, draw your attention to page 11.
We're still working in Township Exhibit 10.
Yes. And this is actually by the little heading E, limitations. And I'm going to go to the third sentence. It says, odors can periodically be a part of the composting process, even with appropriate operating procedures. Is that accurate?
Yes, and it depends upon how much oxygen there is. The lack of oxygen will allow the organic materials to turn septic, and it'll produce an odor when there is a lack of oxygen.
Now, we'll go down to the health and safety precautions, heading C on that same page, onto the next page. And there are references to mold and fungi. And in fact, to the point where individuals who are sensitive to that should not be working in that environment. Is that part and parcel of the process where you, because of all the water, all the organic material can have a fungus or mold?
In the health and safety courses, I've taught twice for preparing compost operators, and there's a condition called white mold or farm mold. And if the material gets too wet and is not turned or adequately aerated, that mold sometimes will appear. And over time, individuals become sensitized to it.
Now, when we talk about the moisture, let's kind of skip ahead to attachment 3 to that same document, which is,
If I can add to my previous comment on the mold, that you'll frequently see that with leaf detritus in forested material, particularly if it's more than about 3 inches deep, and if you'll pull it up, the leaves have had a lot of moisture, rainfall, you can see some of that white mold occur because the leaves aren't getting turned. Your next question.
so let's go to attachment 3 of that same document, which is a troubleshooting guide. And on the left column, you'll see there are problems, middle column causes, and then recommendations in the right-hand column. And you'll see the first category with the list of potential causes is foul odor. The next one is standing water, surface ponding. Next one, inadequate composting, so that's just how slow it would be, I assume. Next category is fires, dry piles. Next category is surface water pollution. The next category is mosquitoes because of stagnant water. Let's stop on mosquitoes there. What about bugs, mosquitoes, that sort of thing? The high moisture content.
Well, it says here stagnant water, and if the piles are adequately managed, you're not going to have stagnant water.
And apparently there's enough, these come up enough that they're in the troubleshooting guide. Here's what you're adjusting time to time, correct?
This troubleshooting guide, two of my colleagues probably prepared this. I'm familiar with it because we produce these documents with some regularity at Gannett Fleming for the 400 plus composting facilities in the state. And these troubleshooting guides are a summary out of either Mr. Epstein's books or Mr. Haug's books, and there's multiple pages of various troubleshooting recommendations for these kinds of composting facilities.
Now, I think you were saying that the windrows would be up to 10 feet high, is that right?
Depending on the equipment, the initial build is probably 8 to 10 feet tall. As they decompose, they're going to be rebuilt probably around 8 feet tall.
That would be in the fall.
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to page 9, middle paragraph that starts with the words, the form and shape of windrows. And I want to actually skip down 5. So the sentence that starts, windrows of autumn leaves can be constructed 6 to 8 feet tall and 12 to 18 feet wide at the base. These piles may be built 8 to 10 feet tall in midwinter months. Larger or smaller piles create problems for leaf composting operations. Do you disagree with that set of statements?
And if you read further down, Cumberland County owns 2 Scat brand windrow turners that can handle piles up to 6.5 feet tall. This operational requirement is very specific to that windrow turner. If you're using a front-end loader, the windrows tend to be taller.
And what, I guess you don't know at this point what kind of equipment you're going to be.
The original start out will be a front-end rubber-tired loader, because the city does not own a windrow turner, and as I've already indicated, that while they would like to become part of the Cumberland County Consortium, those discussions have been terminated until the city has an actual permitted site.
You testified that sort of the end product of this was the finished mulch, and that it would be not distributed to the public there, but would be actually taken off-site to other locations for distribution. Is that correct?
That's the request that I'm working to from the department staff, DEP, or DPW staff from the city, is that they will have some distribution centers.
I think in the last case, you testified about some potentially specific places like certain fire halls or things like that. Is that still up in the air?
We'll have to review those, but the city is going to try to coordinate with their other public access locations, that is for recycling drop-off and other services that they have. So if there is space available and we can do that conveniently at those locations, they'll also have compost to distribute to citizens at those locations.
Yeah. 12 now? And you, being marked as Township Exhibit 12, this is just some DEP guidance special conditions for permits. And specifically, you'll see I've highlighted some provisions relating to finished mulch product. I want to ask you a couple of questions about them. You've had a chance to look at it. Yeah. So is it accurate that under, I'll call it general permit 30 and general permit 25 for shorthand, that finished mulch is actually a product that's regulated by DEP and also the agricultural department? Is that accurate?
It's regulated by DEP. I'm not sure that it's regulated by the Department of Agriculture, except if it's going to have the fertilizer designation. If it has a fertilizer designation, it has to have certain chemical qualities, particularly related to phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen.
So this process of actually producing a finished product mulch, that's something that's also fairly managed, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that what the screen is for, the screening equipment and that sort of thing?
Well, it increases the aesthetic value as well as its commercial value if it's been screened.
Now, Now, to your knowledge, the school district never engaged in any mulch manufacturing at that site, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Mr. Diamond, I'd like to take a brief recess. Would this be a convenient time?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
All right, we will take a brief recess for 15 minutes, reconvening at 8:50. Thank you for your patience, everyone. We're trying to take care of some housekeeping issues because clearly we're not going to be able to wrap this up tonight. So we'll continue, and I'll make an announcement at the end of this evening's session too, but we'll be recessing and reconvening on July 10th. All right, back on the record, please. And thank you all for your patience. I know it's been a very long evening, and you're certainly dedicated residents of the township. It's good to see you here. I feel like we're getting to be old friends as we continue to meet monthly or more often, but thank you for your patience with all of this. Mr. Diamond, are you ready to continue?
Mr. Hasmeyer, were you familiar, or did you have any involvement with a public relations video that the city produced about the subject property actually sent to the township?
Do you have any more specifics about?
And it's posted on the city's website. Maybe it sounds like you did not have any involvement.
No. I knew that it was they were doing a video, but that was all internal to the city staff.
Okay, you had nothing to do with the
No.
content. Now, the street in the front that you mentioned, Stanley Road, that's a private street, correct?
In the eyes of DOT, it's a private road because it does not receive liquid fuels funding.
And did you look at the township's ordinances, subdivision land development ordinance, the zoning ordinance?
For the dedication of streets, I
No,
did.
just generally.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the term arterial street, an artery street?
In the general context of engineering and DOT concepts, yes.
Now, this proposed site would not have direct access to one of those artery-type streets, correct?
The nearest street that I would call an arterial street is, can't think of the name of it. It comes up the hill and circles. Arsenal Drive, thank you. Arsenal Boulevard.
And that, again, I think was your Exhibit 11, which was the 11 or 12. Either one probably, but I want to get a feel for those curing piles, how close they are to the edge of the property at the nearest point.
Based on a scale from Exhibit 11, I'm going to say somewhere around 40 or 50 feet. Estimating it by eye.
Now, in your process of looking at the site and determining feasibility and those kinds of things, did you have any meetings with anyone where the deed, and specifically the reversionary clause in the deed, was discussed?
I don't know that I can say that there were meetings, but I did have discussions about the reversionary clause, both with the city staff, and I believe that I also contacted somebody, or the city contacted somebody from DGS about that.
Did anybody contact the Department of Education?
The State Department of Education? I don't recall whether or not that was done.
Were you directly involved in any discussions with anyone from the state about the reversionary law?
Yes, I was present for some of those discussions.
And with whom from the state?
Oh, I don't know if there was anybody from the state
Oh,
at
I'm
those
sorry.
meetings.
I'm sorry. So, were you, so you were not involved with any, that you know of, any discussions with anyone from the state?
If they were from the state, I don't recall.
Do you recall any of the identities of the folks who were involved in that discussion?
The mayor, I believe Mr. Grover was involved with one of those meetings. And usually anything that I attended, either Aaron Johnson or Dave West from Department of Public Works was usually present.
How about anyone from the school district?
I don't recall anybody being present at any meeting that I was in attendance at.
Now, the facility you're showing, am I correct, that's not a public school facility, correct?
Objection. It's not a public school facility, I don't understand any relevance of it, and I'm just qualified to make that determination. What they say is.
Mr. Diamond, what, I guess I need some
Well, I don't
guidance
wanna
as to
actually
the
telegraph to
relevancy
them
of this
all
line
the
of questioning.
Points of it, but let me just add, that let me narrow it down, let me start with the buildings. The storage building, is that a public school building?
Objection.
Sustained.
What kind of building is the storage building?
It's a pole barn structure is what's provided in Exhibit 13, I think it is. Yes, 13. And it's designed to, intended for the storage of, temporary storage of equipment.
And it's
I think
commercial
we'll-
use?
Pardon me?
Commercial use? Oh, we're not allowed to know what the buildings are?
He testified what the building was, and now my question is.
Yeah, I want to know, so the
One
ordinance,
at a time,
Okay.
please.
My objection is, asking confirmation, is it commercial use? Not sure where that's coming from.
well, if we're going to see if it fits in the ordinance, I think we ought to be able to test what these things are. And for example, a school right now would be prohibited there. So I think knowing with the school district's involvement, I think it's certainly relevant. What is this animal? What are the components of it?
I'll allow this question. You may answer.
So on Exhibit 13, it's a typical pole barn structure. It's supported by vertical timber members. There's a wooden truss facility. There are large doors allowing access of larger pieces of equipment. And the illustration as provided in this conceptual drawing has a steel sheet metal skin on the exterior.
Would the school district be a user of that building as planned?
As planned, this structure is designated primarily for the temporary storage of city equipment during the active composting operations.
Now, in your Exhibit 10, there are things you've listed, and that's what's up there on the wall. And I want to understand what some of these things are that you've called out. So one of them, and this is farther off behind the proposed facility and to the left, says Canine area. Is that something planned or something that's already in use?
There's a canine exercise area that is at the northern end of the optioned property. My understanding, and I have seen some of the impacts of the Canine, is that the city police department routinely takes their canine dogs out there to exercise them and do some training.
And that's all, that's not a future plan, that's already an existing condition?
Yes. In fact, the last time that I was out there, there are some white wooden structures, and they've already been relocated to the area designated on Exhibit 10.
And you mentioned a salt storage area. What's that used? Whose salt is that?
It's the city of Harrisburg. It has concrete walls on 3 sides, and it has a fabric roof structure stretched over steel arches.
In many of the times you were out there personally, you've been to the site, I assume, more than once, correct?
Yes,
Have you seen school buses parked there?
yes.
When you reviewed the zoning ordinance, did you look at provisions for waste processing or disposal facilities at all?
I did.
And a composting facility would generally be within that definition, correct? If you know.
I don't know.
So the proposed option area, and I guess at this point, we don't know whether there's a lease, whether there's only a license, or whether there's even something less than that. But that area is well under 25 acres, correct?
The option area? Yes,
Only 13.13 acres.
correct.
And the facility, including the curing piles, is closer than 500 feet from the southern boundary of the subject property, correct?
Correct.
As part of your application to this board, did you submit any sort of litter control plan?
As part of the zoning application?
Yes.
No, I did not.
How about a contingency plan if there's a facility shut down?
Those are the litter control plan and a pollution prevention and contingency plan are documents that I have for the DEP application, the permit application.
How about an analysis of raw water needs, either private or public, for this facility?
That's also going to be included in the DEP application.
Okay. Hasn't been provided to the township.
It will be. I mean, it's, as soon as it's made available to DEP, it's a public document.
When you have been personally out to the site, and again, refresh my recollection, it's from 2016 forward, is that about the right time frame?
Approximately.
Have you seen any classes, any children out there with a teacher being educated?
The times that I've been there are infrequent enough so that I don't know that I would have encountered any class activity. I did not even encounter operational buses when I've been there.
Now, the area where I understand the alleged leaf pile was is essentially behind the house. If you're standing on Stanley, you can't really see it behind the house, correct?
It is difficult to see from Stanley Road. And the site does have a fence along Stanley Road, and it currently has a lock on the gate.
Were you made aware of the 2019 amendments to the zoning ordinance as they apply to non-conforming use?
I have been informed that there are changes going through the township to amend the zoning ordinance relative to non-conforming uses.
Now, we talked about the relative interior size, and again, my perspective is we started with 0 feet. But the exterior size, if I look at that 0.58 acres, at least in that photo, and look at, it looks to me like most of it is empty. We're talking about an expansion that's certainly more than exterior, 25%, correct? So from whatever that, even if it was a full 0.58 acres to now, is it 13.13 plus the 0.58 acres, or is that 0.58 acres going away?
My understanding, and this is hearsay, but working with the city staff, their arrangement with the school district is that the compost area for the school will be merged into the city's operations.
Okay, when you say merged in, and I want to focus on that little rectangle, do you mean that the leaves will now no longer go to that rectangle, but will now go to the option area? Or do you mean that the shape is now going to be really 13.6 some odd acres, 7 acres?
For the purposes of permitting, we are trying to keep the permitted area under 5 acres. And if the city accommodates the school district leaves and brush, it'll have to be within the permitted area.
May not have any more clues. I have no further questions. I'd like to move for the admission of my exhibits other than the one that's already been refused for admission.
I'm okay with all except that one, that's number 6.
It's number 5.
Go to 6.
That's what we're
Yeah,
at.
the check.
I have no objection to anything else.
So admitted, all except exhibit number 6 for the township. Have you completed your cross, Mr. Diamond?
Just for clarification, I don't recall finding any bikes in the package.
Do you have any objections to
No
any? All of the city's exhibits are admitted then.
have some limited redirect. But to make that proper, I want to be able to focus on that on the transcript the next time possible. We had a lot of testimony this evening, and I want to be able to focus my thoughts on that. Limited redirect, I'll have to go do it the next hearing again on the 10th. Won't take too long.
Is that agreeable with you, Mr. Diamond, then? That we'll recess until July 10th at 6
I'd
o'clock?
prefer if we finished up the witness, but, because I assume I won't get the same opportunity to go prep my witness in the middle of the testimony when we get to my part.
Yep. Let's do it now.
Mr. Sir, would it be helpful if you had an opportunity and some time to look over your notes at this time this evening?
Given the time now, that's not really helpful. It's not, I won't have a lot of questions, I don't believe. I just want to be able to focus properly.
Okay. Time is of the essence, and this has gone on for months. We appreciate that. But at this point, in the interest of thoroughness, and if you'll be concise with your redirect. So at this time, then, the zoning hearing board is going to recess, and we will reconvene on July 10th at 6 p.m. here at the Township Building. We're adjourned.